Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. Today is Monday, and Joe Truzman, my friend and colleague at FDD, is joining us. Joe is our co-host today. At the Long War Journal, Joe is an editor there, and he's also a senior research analyst where he focuses primarily on Palestinian terror groups, Hezbollah, and all things related in goings-on in the Middle East. Follow Joe on Twitter, at Joe Truzman. Joe, happy Monday. Welcome back. As usual, nothing going on over the weekend. We'll start with what I think you and I would consider to be, look, there's talks of a ceasefire, there's tunnels, there's more tunnels being uncovered and destroyed, there's Hezbollah killed an Israeli soldier, a drone attack. But to me, and I suspect you probably would agree with this, Joe, the most interesting story is the suicide bombing in Tel Aviv. So according to reports from Israel, the bombing appears to be caused by what's known as a premature detonation. It's one of the most deadly diseases that ravages the terrorist community. Mortality rate, 100%, and there's no cure. Once you get that, you're done. I mean, look, obviously I'm making light of a very serious situation. I can't help it. It is what it is. The bomber obviously was killed. Unfortunately, a passerby was wounded. This could have been so much worse if the bomber reached his intended target. Joe, what do we know about the bomber? What do we know about this? Who was he? Do we even know? Where was he from? And does anyone claim credit?
Right. So this one was kind of strange. So we'll step back a little. So we know there's been attempts to carry out suicide bombings over at least during the course of this war. There was one back in March where the Israelis stopped a suicide bomber en route to Israeli territory. There was another one as well later on. I can't remember if it was a couple months or two after that. But anyway, so there's attempts. Okay, so this isn't really new. Okay, the scary part about this, or what was concerning, is that the bomber was inside Israeli territory. He was in southern Tel Aviv. All he had to do is go to his target and hit the switch and carry out the attack. Right. For some reason, when we don't know why, that bomb, it went off, right? So nevertheless, it's what we're seeing, I think, now. It could be a couple of things. Obviously, Hamas we could talk about this after a little too, but they rejected a ceasefire. So, we may be trying to stir something up here, obviously with attacks inside Israeli territory. And I've been talking about this for a while now, is the West Bank, right? So we need that there could be a potential there for a big attack, right? And we're may have seen it yesterday, right? This guy was from the West Bank. We don't know his identity. At least the Israeli authorities haven't released that information. And something when I initially saw the news about this and found out a little bit more information, I kind of thought it was strange. At first I was like, okay, well, naturally, was this a Hezbollah thing? Was this Iran? But then, I thought about it. I was like, well, this guy's bomb went off prematurely, right? So it kind of, I thought, like, well, it's kind of an amateur type job, right? Maybe this guy didn't, he did something wrong, and that's what caused the detonation. So I was thinking, well, maybe this guy was somebody from the West Bank, right? We know that, as I explained before, there's a history there. Terror groups are active. They're getting worse. They're becoming more sophisticated, more organized. And maybe this was from the West Bank. And it turns out it is. But we just don't know the info as far as the details. Was he a Hamas member? Was he a member of Islamic Jihad? Even though both groups claimed joint responsibility for this attack, we don't know. We don't know these details. So, and the interesting thing is, Hamas never published information on the guy, or like what we usually have seen before, especially during the Second Intifada. We usually see when these suicide bombings occur, there'd be like a video of the guy, of the bomber, giving his testament, right, his last testament, and we didn't have that. Maybe Hamas doesn't want to publish this information because they don't want to give the Shin Bet information on the person, on the bomber. So nevertheless, I found it a little strange of what happened, right? And that this, for some reason, this bomb went off early. But yeah, and at the end of the day, Israel avoided a catastrophe, really. And now what we're seeing is more threats, right? Which is very interesting. Hamas Islamic Jihad not only claimed responsibility for the attack, but they said that this was in effect, a change or a new phase, right, in the war, where they're going to continue sending suicide bombers into Israeli territory as long as the war continues. So, could this be Yahya Sinwar, right, changing his strategy? Now he's the new Hamas leader. It's certainly possible. I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me. And a suicide bombing, I don't think wouldn't have been okay without, it wouldn't have happened without Yahya Sinwar's, okay, basically. So there's a lot more questions than answers as usual. So we'll see. I can't say if this is the beginning of something. Maybe it is, but we've seen this in the past already, right? There's been attempts, so we shouldn't be too surprised. But again, Israel narrowly avoided a catastrophe last night for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Joe, you have been warning about this. You've been noting the rising risk from the West Bank. We've been, I think we've been like some of the only people out there just keeping our eye on that. So, unfortunately, I hate when things like this make you be correct, but here we are. It's the nature of our job. The warning from Hamas that the attacks would continue, it reminded me what a Taliban commander, actually from the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan, commander said years ago. He described suicide bombs as their nuclear weapon, basically, because while they may, not be able to stand up to the United States and the U.S.-backed government, that they would roll that weapon out. And there's a lot of truth to that in a way, obviously not the destructive power of a nuclear weapon, but the fear that it creates. And, how it is a perfect terror weapon. I think that's what we experienced with the Israelis in Tel Aviv experienced the other day. I saw a video of the guy walking. He had a big backpack filled with explosives. So they caught it all on CCTV. They said he was somewhere in his 50s. So it was interesting. The Israeli intelligence is certainly going to be certainly picking up the pieces on this one, pun intended. And
right. I'll interrupt you, Bill. Sorry. Yeah. I was going to say something important here is, if you're the Shin Bet, obviously they're trying to figure out who this guy is. They probably know already.
Yeah. If they identified the area, they think he's from a certain town, then it's likely they know who he is. They just want to confirm it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, but also they have to figure out, is this, okay, so did this guy act alone? Well, probably not, because Hamas said that they claim responsibility along with Islamic Jihad. But I wouldn't take that at face value. I would really look into it, see if there was outside help, right? Iran, Hezbollah. They have an interest in the suicide bombing too. For a suicide bombing to happen, for obvious reasons, the killing of Shukur and Ismail Haniya in Tehran. So there's that. Also, they have to figure out, okay, well, has there been a network supporting suicide bombers? If a network has been established already supporting these suicide bombers, right? And that's a problem. So we have to remember, it's not just if it's an orchestrated effort or a concerted effort by terrorist organizations to carry out suicide bombings, there's a network behind that. Okay, you just don't. The suicide bomber is just the last person in this link. Okay, you have the money men, the people that are recruiting the suicide bombers. You have the guys driving the suicide bombers. You have the cameramen filming the so-called martyrs' will and testament. So there's this. The
guy who makes the bomb.
The bomb, exactly. The bomb maker. Right. So there's a lot of people involved. It's not just one guy here. So there's a lot to figure out here, and I'm sure that's what the Shin Bet is doing right now, and the other Israeli authorities. So yeah, it's absolutely concerning that somehow this guy got through, right? But Well, I think I read a report that I think there's one of the either as an Israeli police spokesperson or some authority that said that there'll be more information coming out in the next couple of days. So we'll see. We'll see if there's going to be these raids in the West Bank in the next few days, right? Related to this. Yeah, I totally expect it. And so we'll find out more about this person, right? And how connected he was with the terrorist organizations or maybe foreign actors, right, like Iran or Hezbollah. So it's concerning. I mean, I don't know, and the really interesting thing, more than that, I think I forgot to mention, is that I can't recall Hamas saying this outwardly, or at least being so overt about it, where they've said, we're going to resume suicide bombings. They call it martyrdom operations, and we've seen it actually in this war in Gaza, but now inside Israeli territory, they're saying that we're going to resume this. So it's very interesting. I think they wanted to get a message across. So we'll see if they do. Maybe they do. I don't know. But I think there's a psychological aspect, right, to this. They're trying to get a ceasefire. Hamas trying to get a ceasefire in their terms. Perfect time to send a suicide bomber to rattle the Israelis. Thankfully, this time it didn't work out, but who knows next time, right? So there's a lot in play here, and we'll find out more, I think, in the next couple of days. That's for sure.
Exactly. And there's two, things that Israeli intelligence has to be very concerned about. A, that there's a network in the West Bank that is activated and capable of building the bomb. But second, how did they get them across the border? That's that as well, right? So there's two aspects of it. I guess we're going to find out in the days and weeks to come. Well, maybe we won't find out. They're going to be working to get that answer.
Right. And there's ways. I mean, obviously there's ways because the guy got through, but, there's people that from the West Bank that come into Israeli territory to work, for example, right? So, or visit Al-Aqsa Mosque, so that they can get through. So, it is possible. So we'll see. Because sometimes, and when I say in reference to Al-Aqsa Mosque, sometimes they're not able to get through for whatever reason, so they have to go around and basically infiltrate or try to get through barriers to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque. So it happens, but nevertheless, we'll see. But I don't know. There aren't any terror groups in the West Bank right now saying, this is so-and-so from our organization, right? Everyone's pretty much not talking about it, but there is a lot of propaganda right now, especially on social media networks, from Palestinian terrorist organizations and their supporters, lauding this attempted attack, right, and calling for more, right? It's quite pretty disgusting, to be quite honest with you. But so we'll continue seeing that for sure.
Yeah, exactly, Joe. The next thing, how does this? So the Biden administration came out late last week and said that it believes that it was confident. This was reported in Politico, that confident that it's able to get a deal with Hamas. Hamas pretty much came out over the weekend and said, "Yeah, no, that's not going to happen." Is this a suicide attack or attempt? I guess we'll call it a suicide attack. Is it? You think that's a message from Hamas telling Israel that these negotiations aren't going to happen? I mean, this is something that Hamas has to know will call, if that attack killed a lot of people in Tel Aviv, without a doubt, there would be zero room for talks on the Israeli side. Do you think that's what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it would have completely derailed the talks. So I said last week, there was this statement published by a Hamas spokesperson, who's a member of the so-called military wing, Abu Ubaidah, who, you always see him. He has his face covered with a keffiyeh and the Hamas bandana. Anyway, he published a statement and showing that that an Israeli captive had been killed, and I think that an Israeli captive had been killed, let's say. And so the point is that they're trying, and this was just right when ceasefire negotiations had resumed. And I said, and I tweeted this, I said, listen, we're going to see a lot of this type of propaganda coming out from Hamas, right? And now what we saw last night, I don't think it was a coincidence. Earlier in the day, there was Hamas rejected the ceasefire. All right, or when either the day before, Hamas rejected the ceasefire, and then obviously, a day later, we see this attempted suicide bombing claimed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So, it could be that it was an attempt to derail the talks for now. But it's just so tough to say. The problem, something I've noticed these 10 months is that, we keep hearing all this news about the ceasefire, but a lot of contradictory, reports. And I've gotten to the point where I just don't believe anything. Right? I'm sorry.
Let me share a quick from the political argument. The article here. So I'm going to read from it. President Joe Biden told reporters in the Oval Office on Friday that, quote, "We are closer to a deal than we have ever been," end quote. And then just 2 paragraphs down, it goes, I'm reading again from the article, but Hamas officials who skipped the talks told Agency France Press, the BBC, and other outlets that the framework presented in Doha contains new conditions they cannot agree to and argued it does not align with past versions they accepted. Well, first of all, I don't think Hamas ever accepted, or else there probably would have been an agreement. But I'm with you, Joe. Like it's kabuki theater, these negotiations, and the Biden administration just comes off looking foolish, trying to push this and trying to, closer than it's ever been. So what? It's now 53 miles away instead of 60 or something. I just don't know. I don't know what planet they're living on when it comes to these negotiations, because Hamas is not going to agree to these conditions. They want a full ceasefire. They want and permanent ceasefire, and they want their prisoners, their terrorists being held in Israeli jails released, and they want an end to all Israeli military operations. Those things aren't going to happen.
Yeah, and I think there's details that we definitely don't know about yet. That maybe eventually will come out, but it's all. I think it's just one huge game. And so what Hamas does is they say, "Listen, this is their game. They've been doing this since the beginning." They'll say, they'll put out a statement rejecting the ceasefire because of what Netanyahu or Israel did. Okay, it's not Hamas. We're not doing anything wrong. It's the Israelis that are doing this, and this is how they get away with stuff. This is why you see on these news reports and blah 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 that Hamas rejected the ceasefire because of this, or Israel wouldn't agree to the ceasefire, and so they're basically using Hamas lines here, right? And that's the problem. And it's just, so I've gotten to the point where, I almost don't believe what's coming out in these reports until I see something happening, on the ground in front of me, or like something I can see, something that's tangible, right?
Yeah, we start seeing prisoners being exchanged, right? And then there might be something to it, right?
Right, exactly. But we don't, obviously we're not seeing that. So I think it's just a lot of talk, and I understand this is Hamas. I mean, they're gonna blame everything on Israel and try to seem that like they're the ones trying to establish peace here, right? So, which is ridiculous, but anyway, so that's where we're at. So these ceasefire negotiations right now, things are not looking good, even though there was optimism a few days ago. So I don't know. And then they're trying to, and unfortunately, what we're seeing too is that an attack on Israel by Hezbollah or Iran is being linked to ceasefire negotiations, right? And that's a huge problem. And because it's 2 different things here, but it just what it does, it just adds further pressure on Israel to accept a ceasefire negotiation, especially on Hamas's terms, which is something they can't do. So linking these attacks against Israel by Hezbollah and Iran definitely doesn't. It only serves the axis of resistance, right? The Iran-led axis of resistance. So we'll see. I'm not optimistic about a ceasefire coming up in the next few days. Maybe something will happen, but at least I think right now, if Sinwar really wanted a deal, really felt the pressure, wanted to change things and just stop, he would have said that already. But there would have been a ceasefire, and there hasn't been, obviously.
Yeah, Joe, I'm going to be optimistic on this. I'm optimistic that a ceasefire won't take place because I think it would be a terrible idea for the Israelis to accept it. There's just no reason they could trust Hamas as far as they could throw them. And so, yeah, let me, here, we'll talk, here's another quote from the Politico article, and we'll transition the last item that we'll discuss. So it says, here we go. Another flashpoint in the negotiations includes the status of the Philadelphia corridor, buffer zone between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Israel has pushed to control the area in recent weeks as a security measure to deter future attacks into its territory from Hamas. Hamas, of course, doesn't want Israel to occupy the Philadelphia corridor. And, well, why would that be? And then we have reporting last week and up into today, 50 tunnels used by Hamas were just discovered and destroyed. These all were along the border with Egypt, right? Between the Philadelphia corridor, obviously, is the dividing line between Gaza and Egypt. It's funny. The IDF, you got to read between the lines, and they're not telling you all of these tunnels or any of these tunnels are going through underground, but we know some of them are. Then why does Hamas not want to allow Israel to control this corridor? Because it relies on those tunnels to smuggle people, weapons, ammunition, whatever they need to support their terror infrastructure. And then there's another report that a 1 mile long tunnel in the south also was destroyed. That just came out just as we were getting the show ready. Have the Israelis come close to discovering all the tunnels in Gaza?
Unfortunately, partially, yes. However, I don't think, obviously they haven't with all of them because Sinwar's still running around.
Right.
And I think we talked about this. I know we did closer to when the war began, but it's going to take a lot of time, right, to find the infrastructure or to identify and destroy the infrastructure that Hamas built underneath Gaza. I mean, listen, they've had years and years and years and years and years of time to build these tunnels. Okay, so to build this infrastructure, so it's going to take, I won't say just as long, but it'll take a lot of time to try to find these tunnels and destroy them. And yes, definitely some have crossed into Egypt, and they have served as smuggling tunnels, right, to transfer weapons to Hamas from the northern Sinai. And I did see this report as well. I don't recall if it's accurate, but it does seem accurate that Egypt pledged to make sure that there's no tunnels, right, between Gaza. Yeah, exactly. Between Gaza and the northern Sinai. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, you had that chance and you screwed it up, right? That's a big reason why everyone is in this situation. So, and I doubt it, I'm sorry, but there's just too much corruption on the Egyptian side. So, and I definitely, the Israelis just wouldn't be able to trust them. That'd be just nuts. So anyway, the tunnel is still an issue. Are the Israelis going to leave the Philadelphia corridor in a ceasefire agreement? I hope not, especially if Hamas is in place, right? Especially if Hamas still governs and has capabilities to attack. They just can't do it. The Israelis can't trust Egypt. Definitely can't trust Hamas. So nevertheless, this tunnel issue is going to take a long time. I think it's going to take them to find these tunnels, a long time to find these tunnels. And I don't think they'll have the time to find all of them, to be quite frank. I think there's obviously a lot of pressure for the Israelis to stop the war. We're seeing it everywhere now. From allies, from Israeli allies, and obviously from its foes. We're seeing it we're just seeing it everywhere. So I think we'll find out more at the end of the war, right? I think there's information that the Israelis have kept secret. Maybe they'll release at the end of the war some interesting stuff, and of course we'll talk about it at Long War Journal. But it's just they just need way more time to find all this infrastructure under the ground here. And just one last thing to add is that if you think it's bad in Gaza as far as the tunnels, just wait what's happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah and what they've done with now that is scary. And I know that's a completely separate issue, but it's just something I just wanted to bring up.
No, Joe, it's a great point. I mean, they have all of the resources of a state. They don't have any restrictions on what could be imported or monitored coming in. You're talking about Hezbollah here. So, they have a lot more access to material and the terrain to work it and the ability that the Hamas doesn't have. I tell you what, the Israelis, if they're smart, after this war is over, they just ban the import of all concrete and rebar, and anything that could be used to make tunnels in Gaza.
They've been trying to do that, but the problem is that they can't because it's dual use.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what? I would argue it is. You're right. It's dual use. So let's limit the one of those two uses. I mean, otherwise Israel may be back here again. And that's just the reality of the situation. They just can't, it can't be business as usual. But unfortunately it will be, because that's how things work, unfortunately, in this part of the world. And when it's all going to be held against the Israelis, and Hamas has no responsibility for its own actions, for the tunnels that it's built, the aid that has been diverted from its own people to build terror infrastructure to attack their neighbors who they want to drive into the sea. I mean, that's the situation that exists in Israel and in Gaza and the West Bank. Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have some people that support that here in the United States. So
we do.
It's greatly unfortunate. So, but yeah, that's exactly it. That's at the end of the day, that's it. And Hamas has been very good at concealing their intentions, even though to the general public, right? They'll say, "Oh, we're freedom fighters," or and we're just fighting against the occupation. So some people, they see that as David versus Goliath type thing, and they like it, right? And they're attracted to that, and they support that kind of stuff. But in reality, it's much more different than that. And this has been, a lot of people only understand, as far as history, they only see what's happened on October 7th, when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. See what happened. They've seen what's happened on October 7th and everything after that. They don't see the decades of terrorism that's happened before, right? Or they don't care to know, which is even worse. So there's a lot of history here, and these people, these groups that support Hamas, it's just really sad. And unfortunately we're gonna see a lot of it. We've been seeing a lot of it. We're going to continue seeing more, unfortunately. Now we're seeing it, being injected into politics, right? But that's another story we can talk about at another time. So
yeah, Joe. When people bring that up, and you'll tell them, well, read Hamas's charter. They want the destruction of the Israeli state. It used to be that would give people pause a little bit, and then they would just go back to ignoring it.
Right.
But now I think that's like a feature and not a bug for some of these people. It's not just as much as how much they support Hamas, but some of them are absolutely fine with the destruction of the Israeli state. And that's how things have, I would say, evolved, but I think devolved over the last decade plus when it's come to this issue, that there's just, mainstream, I don't want to say mainstream, that's not but enough support that it's terrifying, that people really would be just fine with the destruction of the Israeli state.
Yeah, and a lot of it's based on lies and misinformation, and it's unfortunate. And social media has definitely played a great part in this. And now we're seeing on the American streets people dressing up as Hamas members and doing stuff that I generally would have only seen in the Middle East. So now we're seeing it in places like I don't know, like Chicago or just anywhere really. So it's
look what they did to the monuments in Washington DC.
Exactly.
And they think that's going to win Americans over. You would think that most people would be horrified by that, but there was a collective shrug. I mean, it barely got reported on in the mainstream press. And it's disgusting. I find it revolting as an American. Forget my support for Israel or any of that. It's just revolting that defacing the statue of George Washington and putting Nazi symbolism and on monuments and walking around with flags that are saying jihad is what was the one who said jihad? It's like jihad is resistance.
There's jihad. There's a few of them. There's it's like it's either jihad or martyrdom.
Right. That's another one. Right?
That's common. That's a common phrase, of course, and I think it's taken from the Quran actually, but I won't get into that. But it's stuff like that, and we're seeing these people just walking around like, and then it's funny because when you ask them, you've seen videos where you go out, people are coming up to them and asking them just simple, basic questions. What does it mean from the river to the sea? What river, what sea are you talking about? And they're just dumbfounded. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, what are you talking about? How can you go out and protest, and you have no idea what you're protesting about, right? You don't even know the fundamentals of what you're trying to support here, right? So that just tells you that a lot of these people are, I don't know, nuts.
Useful idiots like that are puzzling.
Yeah,
And give me reservation. Like if you have a little hope that maybe it's just ignorance and maybe they could be explained. It could be explained to them the errors of their way, but it's the ones that are all in on it. And there's enough of them.
Yes.
That organize the useful idiots. Those are the ones that terrify.
Right. And I'll end it real quick here. What concerns me more than anything is that so these Hamas, there's when it comes to Palestinian terrorism, specifically Palestinian terrorist groups, they've been around for decades upon decades, right? I mean, the 60s and 70s, and they co-opted these Palestinian terrorist organizations, especially when they first started in the 60s and 70s, they co-opted leftist organizations, okay, to their beliefs, okay. So now. So what we're seeing now, a lot of leftist organizations that are supporting what we're like these protests and people that are supporting Hamas and the so-called resistance. We're seeing what I'm concerned about is that these organizations, these leftist organizations, or somebody in these leftist organizations, are going to be inspired to carry out an attack. All right, and that's what if I was an FBI director, right, or local law enforcement, I'd be very worried. I would read my history, okay, about leftist organizations and Palestinian terrorist groups. They go together. They've been doing it for a very long time. So there's history there. I'd be very afraid about that. I'd be very concerned about something like that happening, especially that there's a presidential election. So. We'll see. I hope nothing happens, but that concerns me that somebody's going to get inspired, right? I mean, we talk about it in all sorts of contexts, right? With Jihad and how groups, events inspire others to carry out terrorism. So I'm just concerned that it's going to happen, especially here in the United States.
Yeah, you're right to be. But Joe, they're more worried about people with like an American flag or on their car or things like that, because those are the real terrorists here in the United States. Joe, thanks as always for joining us. Thanks everyone for joining us for today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you could follow us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again. We'll see you all again real soon.